Louisiana is famous for its vibrant culture and beautiful bayous. But deep within the Spanish moss, there are places where people simply vanish. Today, we're covering the 10 most disturbing disappearances in Louisiana history. These cases defy logic, break hearts, and fuel nightmares. If you love deep dives into the unexplained, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and give hype points. It really helps out. Now, lock your doors and let's get into it. Some crime scenes scream. Broken glass, overturned furniture, signs of a fight. But the scene we're looking at today is terrifying for the opposite reason. It's quiet, almost tidy. A kitchen frozen mid-chore, like someone hit pause on an ordinary Friday morning. Pots stacked neatly, doors standing open to the woods. And on the floor, a cordless phone, not just dropped, but with the batteries physically pulled out. Whoever did this didn't leave a mess. They left a message. And the woman who'd been standing in that kitchen, a devoted, careful, deeply religious 58-year-old who carried a gun just to walk out and milk her cows, was simply gone. This is the disappearance of Barbara Blount. Let me set the scene. It's May of 2008 in Holden, Louisiana, a small rural community out in Livingston Parish, set along State Highway 1036. And the geography here is the whole personality of the place. Deep piney woods, sprawling farmland, dirt logging roads that snake off into the trees and vanish. The houses are spread far apart, separated by acres, so privacy out here is total. There's nobody casually glancing out a window at your driveway. But, and this is the crucial flip side, it's also a tight-knit generational community. The kind of place where the same families have lived for decades, where neighbors genuinely look out for one another, and where they're deeply suspicious of outsiders. So you've got this strange double nature. On one hand, eyes everywhere. Everybody knows everybody. On the other, a silent, unwatched theater of dirt roads and dense pines where, if you knew the land, you could do something terrible and nobody would see a thing. Hold that contradiction, because it sits at the dead center of this case. Now, Barbara B. Blount. She was 58 years old, and she is, without exaggeration, about the last person on earth you would ever suspect of staging a disappearance. Let me paint her for you. She lived a meticulously structured, routine-driven life. She was a widow. Her husband had died a few years earlier, and she lived alone on that rural homestead. But alone is misleading, because her 2 adult children lived on the very same road, and she cooked dinner for them every single day. Every day. She was deeply devoted to her Baptist church. She reliably drove her sister to medical appointments. She was the dependable one, the anchor, the pillar. And here's the detail that matters more than any other when you're trying to understand what happened. Barbara was hyper-vigilant, genuinely cautious to her core. She flat out refused to open her doors to strangers. And she habitually carried a firearm, even just to step outside and milk her cows. So this was not a naive woman. This was not someone who'd be easily fooled or caught off guard. Her whole way of moving through the world was built around situational awareness and self-protection. Lock that in. Because everything strange about this case grows out of that one fact. How do you get to a woman who is that careful? Here's how the day unfolded. It's Friday, May 2nd, 2008, and it's an ugly day weather-wise. The region was getting hammered by severe torrential rainstorms. Keep the storm in mind. It becomes important later. That morning, Barbara is home doing ordinary chores. At 11:30 a.m., she's on her landline talking to a neighbor, and she mentions completely casually that she's in the middle of cleaning out her kitchen cabinets. Her tone is normal. Totally normal. Just a woman chatting on the phone while she tidies up. That's the baseline. That's everything is fine. That call is the last time anyone ever knowingly speaks to Barbara Blount. A little later, family can't reach her. And out here, that's alarming, because Barbara is reachable, she's reliable, she's on a schedule. So a nephew drives over to the Highway 1036 property to check on her, and what he finds stops him cold. The house is empty. Both the front and back doors are standing wide open to the storm, rain blowing in. Barbara is nowhere. He calls the police. And then the scene inside reveals itself, and it's deeply unsettling. In the kitchen, the cooking pots are stacked neatly on the floor, exactly consistent with someone who was right in the middle of cleaning out the cabinets, just like she'd said on the phone. So whatever happened, it happened during the chore, mid-task, and then there's the phone. Her cordless landline handset is lying on the floor, not on the counter, not in its cradle. On the floor, with the batteries physically removed from it. A massive search kicks off. And later that same day, around 4:15 in the afternoon, searchers find her car, her silver 4-door Toyota Camry. It's about a quarter-mile north of her house, but it's not just parked on the roadside. It's been driven 25 to 30 yards off the main road, down a rugged dirt logging and hunting club trail, and tucked deep into the trees, shielded from view by the dense pine canopy, deliberately hidden. But Barbara herself? Gone. No sign of her. And to this day, no sign of her. Okay, let's stop and actually take this scene apart piece by piece, because almost every single detail here points away from an accident or a voluntary disappearance and towards something chillingly deliberate. Start with that phone, because it's the detail I genuinely cannot shake. Think about how people actually use a cordless phone. If Barbara was stepping out for a quick errand, the phone just sits on the counter. You don't do anything to it. If she accidentally dropped it, sure, the battery cover might pop off and clatter on the floor. That happens. But that is not what was found. The batteries were pulled out, removed. That's not an accident. That takes deliberate hands and a few seconds of intent. So ask yourself why. Why would someone take the batteries out of a phone? There are really only two reasons. Either they didn't want Barbara to be able to make a call, to dial for help, or they didn't want that phone to ring and draw attention while they were doing what they came to do. Either way, you're looking at someone thinking clearly, someone managing the situation. That's not panic, that's control. Now the open doors and the half-finished cabinets. This paints a terrifyingly specific picture. Barbara wasn't packing. She wasn't heading out. She was elbow deep in a domestic chore, pots stacked on the floor, mid-cabinet cleaning when she was interrupted. And here's where her personality slams back into the story. This is a woman who would not open her door to a stranger. A woman who carried a gun to walk to her own barn. So how did someone get to her, in her own home, fast enough that she never reached for that firearm, never barricaded a door, never got off a call? That tells you something uncomfortable. It was very likely either someone who used a ruse good enough to bypass her ironclad caution, or, more chillingly, someone she actually knew, someone she trusted enough to come to the door and talk to without retrieving her gun. Within seconds, she was taken from the one place on earth she felt safest. And then there's the car, which might be the most revealing piece of all. Picture it. A careful, routine-oriented 58-year-old churchwoman is not taking her clean silver Camry, four-wheeling down a muddy logging trail and tucking it into the pines. That's absurd. Someone else drove that car there, and they drove it there specifically to hide it. But here's the logic gap that's been gnawing at investigators for over 15 years. If an abductor used Barbara's own car as the getaway vehicle, why dump it just a quarter mile from her house? A quarter mile. That's nothing. You don't take someone in their own car and then abandon it practically in the front yard, unless you had a reason. So what's the reason? Maybe they transferred her into a second, waiting vehicle right there at the trail. Or maybe, and this is the part that points the finger right back at the community, maybe whoever did this didn't need a car to get away. Maybe they just walked back into those woods because they lived close enough to do exactly that. And that's where the placement of the car becomes a fingerprint of its own. Because to know that one specific hunting trail, to know it was rugged enough and shielded enough by the pine canopy to hide a car from anyone driving past, you have to know that land intimately. A random stranger passing through on the highway doesn't know which logging trail conceals a vehicle. A local does. Someone who hunts that ground or grew up on it knows exactly where the trees swallow a car. So the geography itself is whispering the same thing the town's rumor mill has whispered for years. This was someone who belonged here. Now, I do have to be fair about the obstacles, because this case had a cruel one. Remember that storm? The torrential rain that was hammering Holden all day? It saturated the ground, turned the dirt roads to soup, and washed away exactly the kind of delicate trace evidence that might have cracked this open fast: tire tracks, footprints, anything left outside the house or around that hidden car. The weather itself acted like an accomplice, scrubbing the scene before investigators could read it. The Livingston Parish Sheriff's Office, with help from the FBI's Baton Rouge Division, has worked it as an involuntary abduction and a likely foul play case from early on. Officially, that's where it stands. And the community? The community has its theories too. Quieter ones, the kind that circulate on those Holden back roads about local cover-ups and people who maybe know more than they've ever said, precisely because of how local that hidden car spot was. So let's land it. Here's the agonizing reality. An upstanding, beloved, careful woman, a daily caretaker for her whole family, a fixture of her church, someone who armed herself just to milk her cows, vanished from her own kitchen in the middle of a Friday morning chore. In a community where everybody supposedly knows everybody's business, in broad daylight, and no one saw a thing. Or at least, no one has ever said they saw a thing. Think about what that means in a place like Holden. The very closeness that should have protected her, all those neighbors looking out for one another, is the same closeness that could be hiding the truth. Because in a tight community, a secret isn't gone, it's just held. So this is where we leave it. A kitchen frozen at 11:30 in the morning, pots stacked on the floor where she set them down, a phone with its batteries deliberately pulled, lying silent, 2 doors standing open to a storm, a clean silver Camry hidden in the pines a quarter mile away by hands that knew exactly which trail would swallow it, and a devoted woman who was right in the middle of cleaning out her cabinets, who told a neighbor she'd talk to her later, and who never came home. We tell ourselves a comforting lie about the countryside. We say it's safe, open, innocent, no crowds, no strangers, no danger, just kids and dogs and big green yards. And for most of us, most of the time, that's true. But every parent knows the other feeling too. That cold flash when you look up and your kid isn't where they were a second ago. Usually it lasts 3 seconds. They're behind the car or around the corner and your heart starts again. But what if it didn't? What if you turned around and the porch was empty and the seconds kept stacking up and your 2-year-old was just gone? That's where we're going today. To a sunny morning in rural Louisiana, a porch full of puppies, and roughly 5 minutes that have never been explained. Let me set the scene. It's May of 2001. The place is the Bluff Creek community, a deeply rural, unincorporated stretch of East Feliciana Parish just outside the town of Clinton, Louisiana, out near US Highway 63. And I want you to really picture this country, because the geography matters. This isn't suburbia. It's big sweeping tracts of dense woodland, rolling hills, and houses scattered far apart with a lot of nothing in between. It's the kind of place where you leave the doors unlocked, where the animals roam free and the kids play outside without anybody hovering. The home itself was a rented place with an open front porch, the whole vibe relaxed and informal and country, peaceful. But flip that picture over and look at the other side of it. Those same dense woods that make it feel private and safe. A small child could walk into that heavy brush and vanish from sight in about 2 seconds. And that quiet rural highway, Highway 63, running right past, at the right moment, that's a fast, unseen way in and a fast, unseen way out. Now the little boy at the center of all this, Wesley Dale Morgan. He was 2 years old, born in March of 1999, blonde hair, somewhere between dark blonde and light brown, and bright blue eyes. He stood about 3 feet tall and weighed around 40 pounds. That morning, he was dressed in a little gray Mickey Mouse t-shirt, blue shorts with a green stripe down the leg, and sandals. And his behavioral profile, if you want to call it that, is the simplest one we'll ever cover on this channel. He was a 2-year-old. Playful, easily distracted, completely dependent, utterly innocent. That morning, he was out on the front porch doing the most adorable, ordinary thing a toddler can do, playing with a litter of puppies. That's the picture. Hold it in your mind because everything that follows is measured against it. Here's how the morning went. It's around 9:40 a.m. on May 15th, 2001. Wesley is on the porch with the puppies. In the house are his 19-year-old mother, Ruby Renee Havard, and her 37-year-old boyfriend, Burnell Hilton Jr. His biological father, Dewey Morgan, lived elsewhere in Clinton. So far, completely normal. Around 9:45, his mother goes inside to make a quick lunch. She leaves Wesley out on the porch with the puppies. And the window we're told about here is tiny, just a matter of minutes, just long enough to get food together. Around 9:50, she steps back out onto the porch. The puppies are there. Wesley is gone, no sound, no cry. She calls his name, nothing. She checks the yard, nothing. She checks toward the road, nothing. And that cold 3-second flash every parent knows. It doesn't end. It just keeps going, and it never ever stops. What comes next is one of the largest search efforts the area had ever seen. Law enforcement floods in, volunteer fire departments, private citizens, the FBI. They bring in professional tracking dogs to work the woods and the surrounding properties. They put units on horseback. The situation gets so serious that the governor declares a state of emergency, specifically so they can finance a Louisiana National Guard helicopter equipped with thermal imaging to scan those dense woods from the air. Think about that. They're using military heat-sensing equipment to find a 40-pound child in the brush. And after an exhaustive search that runs for about 2 weeks, they find nothing. I want to be precise about what nothing means here, because it's the whole case. No body, no clothing, no dropped sandal, no snagged fabric on a branch, no footprints. And, this is the big one, no scent trail. The tracking dogs, working a fresh scene, could not pick up a path leading away from that porch. It was, as people described it, as if Wesley had simply evaporated directly off the porch into thin air. Okay, let's slow down and actually think about this, because there are only a few ways a 2-year-old leaves a porch, and every single one of them runs into a wall. Theory 1. He wandered off. The innocent explanation, and the first one everybody reaches for. He's a curious toddler. The woods are right there. He toddles off to explore and gets lost. And honestly, that happens. Kids wander. But run the numbers. A 2-year-old has tiny legs and a 2-year-old's stamina. In the handful of minutes his mother was inside, how far could Wesley physically get? Not far. Toddlers are slow and they meander. They don't march in a straight line into the wilderness. So if he walked off into those woods on his own 2 feet, a search of that intensity starting that fast should have found him within the hour. They had dogs, thermal imaging, horseback units, hundreds of people. A lost toddler within walking distance of the porch is exactly what all of that equipment is built to find. And that brings us straight to the scent problem, which is the detail that really keeps me up. If Wesley walked into that brush, he leaves a trail. A child stumbling through the woods crushes leaves, snaps twigs, brushes against branches, leaves skin cells and scent everywhere he goes. That's the whole reason tracking dogs work. But there was no trail. Zero. The dogs got nothing leading off that porch into the trees. Now think about what that actually tells you. It's not just we couldn't find him. It's that the physical evidence of him walking away on his own doesn't appear to exist. And if he didn't walk away on his own 2 feet, then how did he leave that porch? Which forces us into theory 2. Someone took him. And the moment you say it out loud, the logistics get dizzying. Picture an abduction. A predator would have to be watching that specific rural house, waiting for the exact minute the mother stepped inside. They'd have to approach, on foot or by vehicle, maybe off Highway 63, grab a 2-year-old and get away clean. And do all of it without the boy screaming, without the puppies setting off a racket, without anyone in the house hearing a thing, in broad daylight on a clear morning. Could it happen? I won't tell you it's impossible. But a silent, perfectly timed, broad daylight snatch of a toddler off a porch from a house with 2 adults inside, leaving zero trace? That's not a crime of opportunity. That's either astonishing luck or chilling planning, and it doesn't sit comfortably either. So both of the obvious doors are jammed. He's too slow and too traceable to have simply vanished into the woods, and a clean, silent, daylight abduction strains belief. which is exactly why investigators were eventually forced to look in a third direction, a much harder direction. They started looking back at the house. And here's where this case takes a turn that genuinely changes how you read everything that came before. Because 7 years later, in 2008, Wesley's mother, Ruby Havard, was arrested, not for anything to do with Wesley directly, but for allegedly attempting to sell another one of her children. Records indicate there was a separate arrest involving allegations of illegal adoption practices regarding another infant. Now, I want to be careful and fair here. The 2008 arrest was a separate matter. She has consistently denied any involvement in Wesley's disappearance, and she has never been charged in his case. But you cannot unhear that piece of information once you know it, because it gave investigators a documented, real-world precedent for a theory they'd never have dared lead with otherwise. And that's the theory the East Feliciana Parish Sheriff's Office and the FBI actually lean toward today. Not that Wesley wandered, not that a stranger snatched him, but that Wesley may still be alive, that he was given away or sold into some kind of illegal underground adoption pipeline. And suddenly, the evidence that made no sense starts to make a terrible kind of sense. No scent trail in the woods? Because he never went into the woods. No body after a 2-week search with thermal imaging? Because there was no body to find. A child who evaporated off a porch. A child who was simply handed to someone or driven away doesn't leave a trail through the brush at all. There are other possibilities still on the table, and I won't pretend there aren't. Maybe a passing opportunist really did grab him off Highway 63, or, the darkest version, maybe something happened to Wesley inside that home, and his body was hidden somewhere the searchers never thought to look before help arrived. Investigators have floated that too. None of it has ever been proven. The mother denies everything. There's been a $10,000 FBI reward, advocacy from retired officers trying to keep his name alive, and decades of effort, and the case is still open, still unsolved. So here's the unbearable place this leaves the family, and it's the cruelest kind of limbo there is, because the not knowing isn't just, where is he? It's that the two main answers point in completely opposite emotional directions. One version says your little boy is dead, that he wandered into danger, or worse, that someone in his own world hurt him, and his body is out there in the Louisiana woods somewhere, waiting. The other version says he's alive, that he grew up, that he's a grown man right now, walking around somewhere under a name that isn't Wesley, with no memory of the porch or the puppies or the mother who turned around to an empty railing. Imagine carrying both of those at once. Imagine not knowing whether to grieve or to hope for over 20 years. So that's where we end. A sunny morning in the Louisiana countryside, a porch, a litter of puppies, a mother who stepped inside for about 5 minutes to make lunch, the most ordinary thing in the world. Oh, and a 2-year-old boy in a Mickey Mouse t-shirt who, in that tiny window, simply ceased to be there. No cry, no footprints, no scent, no answer. Just an empty porch, a confused litter of puppies, and a question that's been hanging in the East Feliciana air for more than 2 decades. Where did Wesley Morgan go? Here's the thing about disappearing in America. It's actually really hard. We leave trails everywhere. Bank cards, cell pings, license plates, and cars especially. A car is a 2-ton metal fingerprint with a serial number stamped into the frame. So when a person vanishes, you can usually find the car, even if you can't find the person. But what happens when both of them disappear? The man and the machine, gone in the same breath, never seen again? That's the puzzle waiting for us in Kenner, Louisiana in the fall of 1989. Because Adrian Planels didn't just drive off into the night. He drove off the edge of the map, and he took one of the most recognizable cars on the road with him. Let me set the scene for you. It's late September 1989. Kenner is a working suburb hugging the western edge of New Orleans, right out by the lake. Picture the vibe. It's that blue-collar hospitality kind of town, the kind where half the people you know work nights in kitchens and bars and come stumbling out after close to unwind. The air's still warm and sticky even in the small hours. Neon glows in the windows of the local lounges. And cutting through all of it are these long, dark stretches of suburban road, quiet asphalt that runs right alongside the deep black drainage canals that lace through Jefferson Parish. You don't think about those canals during the day. At 3 in the morning, with the streetlights thinning out, they're just darkness on the side of the road. We'll come back to that. Now, Adrian Juan Planels, and you'll see his name spelled Adrian in a lot of the reports, so don't let that throw you. He was 23 years old, a small guy, about 5'4", 130 pounds, and by every account, he was about the least likely candidate for a ran-off to start a new life story you could possibly draw up. No criminal record, never been arrested, not once. He lived at home with his parents, and he was incredibly close with his little sister Barbara, who was just 12 at the time. He worked hard. He was a dishwasher and sometimes a waiter at a place called Casa Garcia out on Veterans Memorial Boulevard in Metairie. And here's the kicker that tells you everything about where his head was at. He was in college, and he had an exam coming up. The guy was thinking about studying. That's our victim. A responsible, family-rooted, exam-cramming young man with his whole ordinary life laid out in front of him. But there's a second character in this story. And honestly, it might be the real star, because Adrian's pride and joy was a 1968 Chevrolet Camaro, bluish green, and not a showroom-perfect one. This was a real car, a driven car with prominent rust spots all over it, a classic muscle car with a little character. Hold on to that image, because that car is about to become the most important detail in this entire case. So here's how the night unfolds. September 23rd, evening. Adrian says goodbye to his little sister Barbara and heads off to his shift at Casa Garcia. Normal night, he works. And around 1 in the morning, now technically the 24th, he clocks out and leaves the restaurant with 2 of his co-workers. They're not done yet. They roll over to a spot called Luke Eddy's Lounge on the 2700 block of Mississippi Avenue in Kenner. If you go looking for it today, it's called the Westgate Tavern, but back then it was Luke Eddy's. And this is the part where you keep waiting for the dramatic moment and it just doesn't come. There's no shadowy stranger in the corner, no bar fight, no argument. Adrian has a couple of beers, just a couple, and the reports are clear that he stayed sober because he kept telling everyone the same thing. He needed to get home and study for that exam. So this is a guy who's watching his drinks, watching the clock, with his responsibilities front of mind. Around 3 in the morning, his 2 friends decide to call it. They head out. Adrian decides to hang back a little longer. And then, shortly after 3, he gets up, walks out of the lounge, crosses the street to where he'd parked, and gets into that bluish-green 68 Camaro, Louisiana plate 816B554. Somebody sees him do it. He fires it up and pulls away, heading in the general direction of home. And that's it. That's the last confirmed sighting of Adrian Planels. Anywhere, ever. He never makes it home. The next day, he's reported missing. And the investigation that follows is where this thing goes from sad to genuinely baffling. Because the cops do what cops do. They start pulling on the threads of his life, looking for the reason a 23-year-old walks away. And every single thread comes up empty. His bank account? Untouched. Not a dollar withdrawn. Not before, not after. The account just sits there, frozen at the exact moment he left the bar. His belongings? All of it left at home, his whole wardrobe hanging right where it always was. He didn't pack a bag, he didn't grab cash, he didn't say goodbye to the sister he was so close to. Nothing about this looks like a man who chose to leave. But here's the detail that breaks the whole thing wide open. The car is gone. That distinct rusty bluish-green 1968 Camaro, it's just gone. And it stays gone. Never recovered, never found abandoned, never turns up in a chop shop. And in the more than 3 decades since that night, an exhaustive sweep of national VN databases and law enforcement records shows the car was never sold, never re-registered, never ticketed, never impounded, not anywhere in the entire United States. Okay, now let's slow down because we've got a few things here that flat out refuse to add up. Start with the "he ran away" theory because it's the easy one and it falls apart the fastest. Think about the logic. If Adrian woke up one morning and decided to torch his old life and start fresh somewhere new, Why leave the money? You need money to start over. You need cash for gas, for food, for a room. And it was right there in his account, his to take. He didn't touch a cent of it. And why leave every single thing you own behind? You don't drive off into the sunset toward your bright new future with no clothes, no cash, and no goodbye to a 12-year-old sister you adore. People who run away plan. They withdraw money. They pack. They leave a note, or they at least leave a hole where the money used to be. Adrian left a perfectly intact life with himself, simply subtracted from it. That's not running. That's something else. So fine. Foul play. Say somebody got him. Carjacking gone wrong. Robbery. An altercation. Now we run straight into the car problem, and this is where it gets genuinely strange. Let's talk about that Camaro. A 1968 Chevy Camaro is not a beige sedan. It is not invisible. It's a head-turner. It's loud. It's distinct. It's got rust spots that make it identifiable on sight. If somebody murdered Adrian and took the car, what on earth do they do with it? You can't exactly cruise around town in a car that's now attached to a missing persons investigation in a metro area where that car is recognizable. So you have to get rid of it. And that's where we hit the wall. Because here's the menu of options, and none of them work. Option 1, you drive it into the water, and look, this is Louisiana. Sinking a car in a canal or the Mississippi is a tried and true method out here. And remember those deep, dark drainage canals we talked about, running right alongside the dark roads Adrian would have driven home? It's plausible. In fact, independent dive teams have actually gone looking. They've used sonar boats and underwater drones to scour the downtown canal systems, and they found at least 3 sunken vehicles down there in the murk. 3. But not one of them is Adrian's Camaro. So if the car's in the water, it's hiding awfully well from the people specifically hunting for it. Option 2, you chop it. You take it to a chop shop, you part it out, you sell the pieces, and you melt the rest. That's how you make a recognizable car disappear. But here's the thing that should make the hair on your neck stand up. If the car was professionally stripped and sold for parts, where are the parts? A 68 Camaro is a collector's item. Its components are valuable and traceable. An engine block has a number. The frame has a VIN. Body panels, the VIN tag itself. That stuff has a way of resurfacing eventually on an auction site, in a restoration project, in another car. And in over 30 years, not a single piece of Adrian's Camaro has ever surfaced. Not one bolt with a story attached. And then there's the human detail that nobody can quite explain away. Remember those 2 co-workers, the friends who were drinking with Adrian at Luke Eddy's that night? Almost immediately after Adrian disappeared, those 2 specific people packed up their lives and moved to Texas. Just like that. In the critical opening hours of a missing persons case, the last people known to be with him pulled up stakes and left the state. Now, and I want to be fair here, leaving town is not a crime. And it is not proof of anything. People move, but the timing is the kind of thing that makes behavioral analysts sit up straight. You don't have to believe it means something. You just have to admit it's strange. For years, all of this went nowhere. The case went cold and stayed cold. It wasn't until around 2017 that it got formally reopened by a lieutenant named Brian McGregor, and largely because Adrian's little sister Barbara never ever let it die. She grew up and she spent decades fighting to keep her brother's name alive. The official position from the Kenner police is still an unsolved disappearance, though investigators openly admit foul play is very much on the table. But strip it all back, and here's what you're left with. A responsible young man, dead sober, says goodnight to his friends. He walks across a Kenner Street at 3 in the morning. He gets into a loud, rusty, one-of-a-kind bluish-green Camaro. He starts the engine. He drives toward home. And then both of them, the man and the machine, simply cease to exist. No body, no car, no money trail, no parts, no paperwork in any of the 50 states for 30-plus years. It's as if the road opened up that night and swallowed them whole, and then closed back up like nothing had ever been there at all. A guy said goodnight. He drove off in one of the most recognizable cars on the road. and he drove straight off the face of the earth. There's a particular kind of quiet you find at the very end of the road in South Louisiana. Not peaceful quiet. The other kind. Golden Meadow sits down at the bottom of Lafourche Parish, way down where the land gives up and dissolves into the bayou. It's a shrimping town, a fishing town, an oil town. And in the summer of 1986, it was a town where, as the locals like to say, a rumor isn't really a rumor. It's pretty much the truth. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows everybody's business. So here's the question that's going to haunt this entire story. How does a 22-year-old mother vanish off the face of that town, and nobody officially knows a thing for the next 30 years? Let's set the scene. It's August 1986. If you've never been to South Louisiana in late summer, picture this. The heat isn't weather, it's a physical thing. It sits on your chest. The air is so thick and wet you could wring it out like a dish rag. The bayou water is dark and slow and patient. Out here, the houses are strung along the water like beads, generations of the same families living side by side, porch to porch. It's the kind of place where doors stay unlocked and where your great-grandmother's feud is still your feud, tight-knit, insular. And here's the thing about a place that close, secrets don't really stay secret. They just get contained. They circulate quietly, past porch to porch, until everybody knows, and nobody says. Keep that in your back pocket. We're going to come back to it. Now, Paula Ann Boudreau. She was 22 years old. She wasn't a drifter. She wasn't a runaway. She wasn't somebody on the edges of society waiting to slip through the cracks. She was a mom. She had a 4-year-old little boy named Eric, and by every single account, she was devoted to him. She lived with her parents. She stayed in close, constant contact with her family. There is not one shred of evidence that this was a woman thinking about walking away from her life. No drained bank account, no packed bags, no goodbye, nothing. Her whole world was right there in that little town, anchored to that little boy. And then, on August 3rd, 1986, she was just gone. The last time anyone saw Paula alive, she was at her parents' house, living her normal life, acting completely like herself. And then, the line goes dead. 3 days pass, 3 days of silence that was wildly out of character for a woman who talked to her family constantly. And on August 6th, the family finally does the only thing they can do. They report her missing to the Golden Meadow police. Now, you'd think this is the part where the whole town mobilizes, right? Small town, beloved young mother, everybody knows her. You'd expect search parties through the marsh, flyers in every shop window, the works. But that's not what happened. Instead, the town got quiet. Officially on paper, Paula was a missing person, a question mark. But underneath the surface, the whispers started almost immediately. And the whispers weren't, "I wonder where she ran off to." The whispers were that Paula didn't run anywhere. The whispers were that Paula was murdered. And here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. Because shortly after she vanished, somebody walked into the Golden Meadow Town Hall and confessed. I want you to really sit with that. The town secretary, an official at an official building, wrote down a statement about Paula's disappearance and her death. And she didn't just write it down. She recorded it on audio tape. Then she handed both of those things, the written statement and the tape, directly to the local police chief. A confession, documented, recorded, physically handed to law enforcement, and then it disappeared. The tape vanished. The statement vanished. They never made it to the Lafourche Parish Sheriff's investigators. They just evaporated out of police custody, like they were never there at all. Now, hold on a second. Let's look at that again. Evidence doesn't just walk out of a building on its own. So who made a confession to a murder disappear? It helps to know who was running the show. Back then, the Lafourche Parish Sheriff's Office was under the administration of a man named Duffy Bro. And this is not me speculating. Bro and several of his top deputies would later end up pleading guilty to federal corruption charges. So you've got a documented criminally corrupt law enforcement environment, the kind of place where, If the wrong person was involved, evidence could quietly get misplaced, ignored, or simply made to vanish to protect the right people. And so that's how it sat. For decades, a young mother gone, a town full of people who seemed to know, a confession that ceased to exist, and a case file gathering dust. Now fast forward, way forward, more than 30 years. While Paula's case was frozen in time, something else had been sitting in a different file, in a different parish, the whole time. Because back in January of 1989, 3 years after Paula vanished, a man out hunting in the marshy woods up near Slidell, Louisiana, stumbled onto human skeletal remains. A woman, but Slidell is in St. Tammany Parish, way over on the other side of the state. And in 1989, the technology just wasn't there. The coroner couldn't identify her, so she became a Jane Doe. Nameless, filed away, a separate mystery entirely, 105 miles from Golden Meadow. For over 30 years, nobody connected these two things. 2 parishes, 2 files, 2 dead ends. Until a relative decided to do the police work nobody else would. A distant cousin and amateur genealogist named Michelle Chuest, driven by her own account by the grief of losing her own son, started digging. She came across a composite sketch. The LSU Faces Lab, the forensic anthropology folks, had built a facial reconstruction of that 1989 Slidell Jane Doe. And when Michelle looked at that reconstructed face, she saw Paula. She saw her own family. In 2022, she sent a tip to the national database flagging the connection. And in January of 2023, investigators finally pulled DNA from Paula's surviving sister Lillian and from her son Eric, that little 4-year-old, now a grown man. And the science said yes. The Slidell Jane Doe was Paula Boudreau. They'd found her. So, we've got an answer. Case closed, right? Not so fast, because the answer they found just splits open into a dozen worse questions. Let's start with the one that should bother you the most. The silence. If, and the rumors say this, if half of Golden Meadow was quietly whispering that Paula had been killed, if a confession was literally recorded inside the town hall, then how does this case stay unsolved for 30+ years? Think about the logic here. This is not a city of millions where a person can disappear into anonymity. This is a town at the end of a single road where everybody knows your business before you do. The information was there. It existed. The whispers, the confession, all of it. And it took a grieving relative with no badge, no subpoena power, no forensic lab, just a laptop and a broken heart, to crack it open. How does an entire police department in a town that small, with a recorded confession in hand, miss something the gossip mill had figured out in a week? The honest answer is, they probably didn't miss it. They buried it. And there's a corruption conviction sitting right there in the record to suggest exactly how. Now, look at the geography, because it's screaming at you. Golden Meadow's at the absolute bottom of the state. Slidell is way up near the Mississippi line. That's 105 miles. And this body didn't float there. Somebody drove her. Somebody put a body in a vehicle and hauled it across multiple parishes, through busy corridors, probably right through the heart of New Orleans on Highway 90, and did it without getting caught. That's not panic. That's not a crime of the moment. That is calculated, deliberate, cold-blooded post-murder logistics. That takes a plan, and frankly, that takes nerve. Then there's the gap. Paula vanished in 1986. The remains turned up in 1989. So what happened in those 3 years? Were the remains hidden somewhere closer and only moved later? Was she somewhere else entirely before she ended up in that marsh? 3 years is a long time for a body to wait to be found, and the timeline raises a question nobody has fully answered. And now, the detail that turns your stomach. When that Jane Doe was found, crucial identifying markers were missing. The remains were recovered without hands. And let's be very clear-eyed about what that means, because there's really only one reason somebody does that. It is a calculated forensic countermeasure to remove the fingerprints. You do it to stop identification. So think about what that tells us about the killer. This wasn't a stranger, an accident, a body left where it fell. This was somebody who knew Paula would be looked for, somebody who understood how the system works, how a body gets identified, and who took specific gruesome steps to defeat it. That's not rage. That's knowledge. That is someone who understood exactly what they were hiding and exactly who would come looking. So who do investigators believe did this? In July of 2024, after reopening the case and recovering old blood evidence from a kitchen and from a bathroom, the Lafourche Parish Sheriff's Office arrested and charged 2 people with Paula's murder, a man named Russell Lee and his ex-wife, Judith Judy Weiser. Now, I have to stress, they are charged, accused, not convicted. Everybody is innocent until a court says otherwise. But the theory laid out by investigators is an old, ugly one, a love triangle. The allegation is that Russell Lee was married to Judith, but involved with Paula, and that the 2 of them acted together. And here's a chilling little footnote. In the weeks before Paula vanished, neighbors reportedly saw Judith out on a local road, holding a cane knife, a heavy agricultural blade, making threats. People saw it. People remembered it for nearly 40 years. And that's what makes this case sit so heavy. Because the family finally got the one thing they spent decades begging for. They got Paula back. They got a name for the Jane Doe. They got 2 people in handcuffs. After all that time, the Bayou finally gave up its secret. But ask yourself what kind of answer this really is. A confession was recorded, and then it disappeared inside a police station. A corrupt sheriff's office ran the show. A body got driven 105 miles across the state. The hands were taken so she couldn't be named. And an entire town, a town where you can't sneeze without your neighbor saying, "Bless you," somehow held this inside itself for over 30 years, passing it porch to porch, until a grieving cousin with a composite sketch did what the system wouldn't. A young woman went into the water at the end of the road in 1986, and everyone who could see the surface of it just looked the other way. For 30 years, and the worst part, the whispers were right the whole time. Here's a thought that should genuinely unsettle you. We assume that if something terrible happens, it happens out there, in the deep woods, the dark swamp, the empty highway, somewhere remote and unwatched. But what if the most disturbing disappearances happen in the most public place imaginable? What if a young woman could vanish in the middle of a major American city, surrounded by houses, joggers, traffic, helicopters, dive teams, and a search effort that made national news, and stay completely invisible for 3 months? Not buried in some far-off marsh, just sitting beneath the surface of a calm urban bayou, a short distance from where she was last seen, while her family searched the entire country for her. That's the nightmare at the center of this case. This is the story of Teralyn Monette. Let me set the scene. It's March of 2013 in New Orleans, specifically the Lakeview neighborhood. And Lakeview is nice. It's a relatively safe, bustling area full of bars, restaurants, and young professionals. The kind of place where you go out on a weekend, have a few drinks with friends, and never once feel like you're in danger. And running right through this part of the city is Bayou St. John, a historic, calm urban waterway with grassy banks where locals jog and walk their dogs in the daylight. It looks peaceful, picturesque even. But here's the thing about Bayou St. John that you need to understand, because it's the dark heart of this whole story. The water is opaque, murky, near zero visibility. The muddy bottom of that bayou is a kind of historical graveyard. Over the years, it's collected discarded junk, storm debris, and yes, sunken cars. The surface is tranquil. What's underneath is anything but. Remember that contrast. Now, the woman at the center of it, Teralyn Monette. She was 26 years old, originally from Long Beach, California, and she'd come to New Orleans for a beautiful reason. She'd joined a teaching program that placed dedicated educators in under-resourced New Orleans schools. She was an elementary school teacher. And not just any teacher. She was beloved, respected, the kind of teacher kids remember for life. In fact, the very night this story takes place, she was out celebrating a Teacher of the Year nomination. Let that sink in. This is a responsible, brilliant, routine-oriented young woman deeply committed to her students, who was, by every account, not a heavy or reckless drinker. She had a whole life, a whole future, and a room full of kids who adored her. She is the absolute last profile of a person who just walks away. Here's how the night unfolded. It's the early hours of March 2nd, 2013. Terralyn is out at Parlay's Dream Lounge in Lakeview, celebrating that nomination with friends. They're having a great night. And around 3 a.m., Terralyn does something that tells you everything about her character. Recognizing that she'd had too much to drink to drive safely, she tells her friends she's going to sleep it off in her car for a while before heading home. Think about that. That's the responsible choice. That's a person making a careful, mature decision. Don't drive drunk. Rest, sober up, then go. But here's where it gets strange. A little after 5 a.m., parking lot surveillance cameras capture her black Honda Accord pulling out of the lot next to the bar. So at some point she woke up, or decided she was okay, and started driving. Traffic cameras then catch the Honda turning left, heading lakebound, onto Marconi Drive from Harrison Avenue. And then, a few hours later, her cell phone signal simply drops off. That's the end of the digital trail. The car turned toward the lake, and Terralyn Monette vanished. When she doesn't show up for school, for her kids, the alarm goes up immediately, because that is so wildly out of character. And the search that follows is enormous. It becomes a national news story. Police, community volunteers, and professional dive teams scour the city. Helicopters in the air, cadaver dogs on the ground, sonar in the water. Weeks pass, then a month, then 2. And they find nothing. Absolutely nothing. And as the silence stretches on, a terrible theory takes hold, that Terralyn had been targeted, abducted, that someone took her. Then, 3 months later, on June 8th, everything changes, but not because of the official search. A state representative named Austin Baden and a volunteer police diver named Mark Michaud, frustrated by the total lack of results, decide to independently run sonar through Bayou St. John near Harrison Avenue. And almost immediately, they hit a large submerged object. Michaud goes down to look, and there it is, Terralyn's black Honda Accord, fully submerged in about 9 feet of water, coated in a greenish biological film from months underwater. Her remains are inside, in the driver's seat, right in the middle of the city, a short distance from the bar. Okay, let's stop. Because the questions this raises are staggering, and they don't have comfortable answers. Start with the most jaw-dropping one. How on earth was that car invisible for 3 months? This wasn't the open ocean. This wasn't a 100-mile stretch of bayou. This was a shallow urban waterway, surrounded by homes and roads and people, right in the city. And the official search teams said they had searched these waters. So how does a coordinated, sonar-equipped professional search grid completely miss a full-sized Honda Accord sitting in 9 feet of water for 3 solid months? And here's the part that makes it almost surreal. During those 3 months of searching that bayou, crews actually pulled other submerged cars out of it. Reports put the number somewhere between 17 and 20 other vehicles dragged from that murky water, 17 to 20 cars. And they missed hers, the one they were actually looking for. It took a frustrated volunteer with his own sonar to find it in an area that had supposedly already been cleared. Now, I'm not saying I have the answer to that, but you cannot tell me that's not a colossal, almost incomprehensible failure. Then, there's the physics of how she got in the water. Run the official scenario. Terralyn wakes up, starts the car, gets disoriented in the pre-dawn dark, and accidentally drives into the bayou. Okay, but cars don't drift into water like a leaf on a pond. A car launching off a bank into a waterway is a violent event. So where was the physical evidence on the shore? Where were the tire ruts gouged into the grass, the torn-up turf, the damaged curb, the skid marks, the scar a 2,000-pound vehicle leaves when it goes off the road into the water? And in a populated neighborhood, how does a car crash into a bayou at dawn without a single person hearing the splash or seeing anything? These are fair questions, and they're exactly the questions her family kept asking. And here's the cruelest consequence of that botched search. It didn't just delay finding her. It may have destroyed the answer entirely. Because the crime scene, if it was one, sat underwater for 3 months, degrading. The car, the body, any potential evidence, all of it soaking in murky bayou water through a Louisiana spring. By the time they finally pulled the Honda out, reconstructing exactly how Terrelyn ended up down there was nearly impossible. Was it a tragic, sleepy, drunk driving accident? A responsible young woman who made one fatal misjudgment in the dark? Or was she followed from that bar, forced off the road, and put into the water by someone? The horrifying truth is that the months of delay may have washed away the one thing that could have told us the difference. Now, officially, and I want to be fair to the official record here, the Orleans Parish Coroner ruled the cause of death as drowning, and the New Orleans Police Department categorized it as a tragic traffic fatality, that she became disoriented, veered off Marconi into the bayou, and drowned, with no foul play involved. On paper, the case is closed as an accident, but that ruling has never sat right with a lot of people. Her family and community openly questioned the physics and the timeline, asking, reasonably, how an area could be searched exhaustively for 3 months and still hide a car less than a mile from the starting point. That gap fueled darker theories, including the unsettling possibility that the car was pushed into the water after the initial searches had already swept the area. Is that proven? No. But you can understand why a family would wonder when the official story requires you to believe the search teams missed the obvious for 90 days. And there's one more layer to this that I think we have to name because it's part of the case's legacy. As the search dragged on, it sparked a real conversation about something called missing white woman syndrome, the well-documented pattern where certain missing persons get massive media attention while others get far less. Terrelyn was a black woman, and advocates pointed out that her case initially struggled to get the resources and urgency it deserved, even as, eventually, an extraordinary wave of volunteers turned out to search for her. And here's a detail that captures the family's frustration perfectly. At one point, they were outraged to learn that a trained computer forensics investigator had been pulled off analyzing Terrelyn's digital footprint, actual evidence in her disappearance, in order to prepare routine crime maps for the department. To the family, that wasn't just a staffing decision. It was a statement about how much her case mattered. So where does that leave us? With a case that's technically solved, ruled an accident, closed on paper, and yet leaves almost everyone who looks closely with a knot in their stomach. The official answer is drowning. But the how is buried in 3 months of murky water and a search effort that failed so completely it's hard to fully trust anything that came after it. And underneath all the theories, there's just the unbearable human image at the center of it. While her family flew in from California, while volunteers walked the streets, while helicopters crossed the sky, and divers pulled 20 other cars out of that bayou, Terrelyn was right there, the whole time. 9 feet down, a short drive from the bar where she'd been celebrating the fact that she was good enough at her job to be named Teacher of the Year. Hiding in plain sight in the middle of one of America's most watched cities, while everyone who loved her looked everywhere but the one place she actually was. So here's where we leave it. A night of celebration, a responsible decision to sleep it off, a car turning toward the lake in the pre-dawn dark, and a city of 500,000 people that somehow looked right past a tragedy sitting just beneath the surface for 3 long months before a single frustrated volunteer decided to look where no one else had thought to look twice. There's a brutal, well-documented truth in the study of domestic violence, and it's this. The single most dangerous moment in an abusive relationship isn't while the victim is trapped inside it. It's the moment she finally finds the courage to leave. That window, right after she walks out the door, is statistically the most lethal time of all. Crystal Dupuis. Grebinger knew the danger. She did everything right. She got the protective order. She filed for divorce. She hid in a shelter built specifically to keep monsters out, and she still vanished. What follows is a story that sprawls across 2 continents, involves a fabricated secret agent identity, an international manhunt, and a death in a foreign prison that slammed the door on the truth forever. This is the case of Crystal Grebinger. Let me set the scene. It's February of 2013 in Lafayette, Louisiana, that bustling hub of Cajun culture we visited before. But for Crystal, Lafayette wasn't a vibrant city, it was a cage, because Crystal was living in hiding in her own town. And I want you to really sit with what that's like, because it's its own special kind of horror. Imagine living every day looking over your shoulder. Imagine that the place keeping you safe is a domestic violence shelter, a building whose entire existence depends on secrecy. Undisclosed location, locked doors, strict rules about who comes and goes, where you can be seen, who you can tell. These places are designed, deliberately, to function as hidden fortresses against the people hunting the women inside them. That was Crystal's life. Not freedom, survival. Constant, exhausting, suffocating vigilance. That's the atmosphere of this case. Fear you can't put down. Now, the woman at the center of it, Crystal Dupuis-Grebinger. She was 32 years old, a small woman, just 5 feet tall. And the most important thing to know about her, the thing that makes everything that follows so unbearable, is that she was a mother of 4. The people who knew her described her with one word over and over: a fighter. She was resilient, fiercely dedicated to her kids, and absolutely, categorically, not someone who would ever voluntarily walk away and abandon her children. That wasn't in her. And we know she was a fighter because of what she'd already done. In November of 2012, she filed a formal protective order against her estranged husband, Sean Grebinger. And the details in that order are chilling. She described severe, systematic domestic abuse, including a physical attack that threatened her life, and she stated plainly that she feared for her life. Then, just 2 weeks before she disappeared, she filed for divorce. She was actively, bravely, methodically trying to get free. Here's how it unfolded. In early February 2013, Crystal leaves the safety of the shelter for a brief window. February 7th, she steps out, and by February 8th, she's seen alive in Lafayette for the very last time. Then, silence. She stops answering her phone. She doesn't return to the safe house. Her family is thrown into a panic because this is so completely against everything they know about her. And here's the detail that turns panic into certainty for her loved ones. She missed court. Crystal had child custody court dates coming up, and for a mother fighting that hard for her 4 children, missing those hearings was unthinkable. It would never happen. So when she failed to appear on February 18th, she was officially reported missing. A woman who would crawl over broken glass for her kids simply wasn't there. Eyes turned immediately to one person, Sean Grebinger, the estranged husband, the man with the documented history of violence and control, the man she'd accused of trying to strangle her. He was the obvious starting point, so police go to bring him in for questioning. And he's gone. Not just laying low, not hiding across town, gone from the country. Sean Grebinger had fled all the way to Sao Paulo, Brazil. An international manhunt kicks off, the FBI gets involved, an extradition warrant for Crystal's murder eventually goes out, and the search goes global. And then, years later, the strangest anticlimax you can imagine. Around January of 2020, 7 years after Crystal vanished, Sean Grebinger is finally arrested by Brazilian military police in a town called Pouso Alegre. And here's the grimly fitting reason he got caught. He was arrested for domestic violence against a new wife, a Brazilian woman he'd married after fleeing. Same pattern, same man, different country. With that active American warrant hanging over him, he's now in custody, awaiting extradition back to Louisiana to finally face what happened to Crystal. And before that can happen, before he can be sent home, before he can be made to answer a single question, before anyone can ask him the one thing that matters most, where is Crystal? Sean Grebinger is found dead in his Brazilian jail cell. Brazilian authorities ruled he took his own life. And just like that, the answer dies with him. Okay, let's stop and pull this apart, because at every single turn, this story refuses to behave like a simple crime of passion. Start with the shelter. We said it. These places are fortresses, hidden addresses, locked doors. The entire model is built around one principle: the abuser cannot find you. So here's the question that should be screaming at you. If Crystal stepped out of that protected space for a brief window, how did Sean know? How did he know exactly where she'd be and exactly when she was vulnerable and exposed? Lafayette is a city of well over 100,000 people. You do not just bump into your hidden estranged wife by random chance in a city that size in the narrow window she happens to be outside her safe house. So what does that leave? Either he was tracking her somehow, her car, her movements, her patterns, or somebody leaked her location. Either way, that's not an accident. That's a hunter who knew where the deer would be. Now think about the flight to Brazil, because this is the detail that, for me, blows up the "he just snapped" theory entirely. People want to imagine domestic homicide as a moment, a fight that goes too far, a loss of control, panic. But look at what Sean Grebinger actually did. He fled to another continent. And you don't do that on impulse. You don't wake up one morning, grab your wallet, and hop a flight to South America. International travel like that takes a valid passport. It takes significant cash. It takes planning, knowing where to go, how to get there, how to land somewhere you can disappear. So ask yourself, if this was a man who lost his temper in a single terrible moment, how was he so perfectly positioned to vanish across international borders the instant the heat came down? That kind of escape isn't the aftermath of a crime of passion. That's the exit strategy of someone who was thinking several moves ahead. And then there's what he did once he got to Brazil, which crosses from calculated into almost unbelievable. To secure a residence permit and stay in the country, he quickly married a local Brazilian woman. And to explain his sudden funded arrival to the people around him, he didn't keep a low profile. He invented an entire fake life. He reportedly claimed to be an American Special Forces counterterrorism agent who'd been granted asylum because of political persecution by the U.S. government. Read that again. A man wanted in connection with his wife's disappearance reinvented himself as a persecuted secret agent hero. And the arrogance didn't stop there. He allegedly gave an interview to a Louisiana newspaper, boasting about his great new life in Brazil, while his wife was still a missing person back home. That is not the behavior of a guilt-ridden man hiding from the world. That's a man performing his own escape, rubbing it in, completely confident he'd gotten away with it. Which brings us to that death in the cell and the timing that has tormented Crystal's family ever since. Look at when it happened, right when investigators finally had him cornered, right when the extradition was in motion, right when, for the first time in 7 years, there was a real chance someone could put him in a room and ask him where Crystal's remains were. And in that exact moment, he's gone. Now, officially, it was ruled as a self-inflicted death, and he reportedly left farewell letters, including instructions to friends to take care of his children. Think about that last act. Even at the end, he's controlling the narrative, casting himself as the devoted father, managing how he'd be remembered. Whether it was the brutal reality of a foreign prison closing in on him or a final calculated move to stay in control to the very end, the result is identical. He took the one secret that mattered to his grave. He cheated a courtroom. He cheated Crystal's family out of a trial, out of testimony, and out of the answer. So here's the agonizing place this leaves everyone. On paper, this case looks solved. Investigators were confident in their suspect, confident enough to build a murder case and chase him across the world. They had, by their own accounts, quietly amassed substantial evidence pointing at Sean. For years, they publicly claimed they had no named suspects, but that was tactical, a way to protect the integrity of a grand jury and a delicate international extradition. Behind the scenes, they knew exactly who they were after. But knowing isn't the same as proving in a court of law. Sean Grebinger was never convicted of anything in connection with Crystal because he died before he could ever stand trial. The case against him was never tested in front of a jury, and the human cost of that is brutal. The prosecution ended, but so did any hope of an interrogation that might have revealed where Crystal is. Because that's the part that still isn't finished. Crystal Grebinger has never been found. A brave mother of 4 who did everything the system asks a victim to do, who got the order, filed the divorce, hid in the shelter, showed up to fight for her kids, is still out there somewhere in the Louisiana landscape. Her family got a kind of answer. They got a name, a manhunt, a capture. But they never got her. They never got a body to bury, or a trial to sit through, or the simple devastating mercy of knowing where she rests. So here's where we leave it. A woman summons the rarest kind of courage and walks out the most dangerous door there is, the door away from her abuser. She does it carefully, bravely, by the book, and it still isn't enough to save her. The man investigators are certain hunted her down reinvents himself as a fake secret agent, builds a whole new life an ocean away, and then dies in a cell at the precise moment the truth was finally within reach. 2 continents, 7 years, a global manhunt, and in the end, the one secret that would let a family finally rest is buried somewhere in the Louisiana ground, guarded now by a dead man who made very sure he'd never have to say a word. We tell ourselves that if we ever went missing, the system would come for us. Search parties, helicopters, detectives knocking on doors. That's the promise, right? Someone is watching, someone will look. But what happens when you vanish and nobody official seems to care? What happens when the people sworn to protect you decide almost immediately that you simply walked away and they just stop? This is a story about a woman who disappeared 2.5 blocks from her own front door in a packed New Orleans neighborhood full of houses and traffic and doorbell cameras. And it's about the terrifying truth her case exposed, that sometimes, if the authorities don't care, you are completely, utterly on your own. This is the case of Jessica Easterly Durning. Let me set the scene. It's August of 2019 in New Orleans, the Lakeview neighborhood, right up against the sprawling green footprint of City Park. And I need you to throw out the swamp and bayou image we've used in so many of these other cases, because this is the opposite of that. This is not deep, isolated, end-of-the-road country. This is modern, residential, packed-in suburbia, houses sitting close together, busy streets, joggers, dog walkers, traffic. A neighborhood where in 2019, Ring doorbells and security cameras were everywhere. This is connected, watched, ordinary city life, which is exactly what makes everything that follows so infuriating. Because in a place this visible, a place this full of eyes, a woman still managed to disappear and stay hidden for 10 days. The only thing about this geography that matters is one small detail. Those tidy residential blocks have transitional edges, patches of overgrown high grass near the park, little pockets of brush where, in the sweltering August heat, something or someone could lie unseen. Hold on to that. Now, Jessica. Jessica Easterly Durning. She was 43, originally from D'Iberville, Mississippi, and she was vibrant, deeply loved by her friends and family, and very active and communicative online and in her relationships. This is not a withdrawn, isolated person who falls off the radar quietly. This is someone people talk to constantly. And critically, she was someone who would never simply walk away from her life. She wouldn't leave without her phone, without her ID, without the things every adult carries. So when she went silent, the silence itself was the alarm. But there's a layer to Jessica's story you have to understand, because it becomes central to why this case was handled the way it was. Behind closed doors, her life was complicated. She and her husband, Justin, had a volatile marriage, and the two of them shared a secret. They ran a mature entertainment business out of the home, producing adult digital content. I'm not telling you that to be salacious. I'm telling you because it matters enormously to how the system treated her later. Remember it. And here's the most important part of her profile, the thing that turns this from a sad story into an enraging one. Jessica was not a passive victim drifting toward disaster. She was actively, concretely planning to get out. She had reached the breaking point in that marriage, and she was executing an exit. She had reached out to her support network for help, real, physical help, to leave. Here's how it unfolded. Sometime before that August, the tension in the home spiked. Jessica and Justin had hosted a couple from out of state, from Florida, for a rendezvous connected to their lifestyle. And by accounts, that encounter went south, badly escalating the pressure inside the house. Then, on August 12th, Jessica makes a phone call that will haunt everyone who knows what came next. She calls a close friend. We'll call her Maria, as she's been referred to. And she says it plainly. She has finally decided to leave Justin. And she urgently asks Maria to physically come and help extract her from the home. Get me out. Help me leave. Maria agrees. She's scheduled to travel and help Jessica the very next day, August 13th. And on August 13th, Jessica goes silent. All communication ceases. She can't be reached. The day her rescue was supposed to arrive, she vanishes from her home, leaving her essential belongings behind. Now, this is where it gets infuriating. Because look at the reactions. Her husband, Justin. In the days after she disappears, he gives law enforcement and friends accounts of her last night that are reportedly conflicting and shifting. The story changes. And to be crystal clear and fair here, Justin Durning has never been charged with any crime in connection with Jessica's disappearance or death. But his behavior in those early days drew immediate suspicion from the people around her. And the police? When they finally get involved, they brush it off. They slot it into the laziest possible category, an adult who chose to leave. A grown woman who walked out on a bad marriage. No organized searches, no crime scene, no urgency. Case essentially shelved before it began. So Jessica's friends and family are left standing there, terrified and enraged, watching the people who were supposed to find her do nothing. And they make a decision that should never, ever have to be made. They decide to do it themselves. Her out-of-state sisters actually travel to New Orleans because the official investigation has produced nothing, and they organize their own search, and within hours of looking, they find her. Just 2.5 blocks from her own front door, in a patch of tall grass near a busy street, Jessica's body, by then, after roughly 10 days in the brutal Louisiana summer heat, having suffered severe exposure to the elements. Her sisters found her, not the police, not cadaver dogs, not a grid search, her family who had to fly in from out of state and walk into the weeds themselves. Okay, let's stop and tear into this because the logic gaps here aren't subtle, they're craters. Start with the husband's behavior, and let's just think about how a person actually reacts when their spouse vanishes. Your wife disappears without her phone, without her ID, without the things she'd never leave behind. What do? You panic. You lose your mind. You tear the city apart. You call everyone. You beg the police to move faster. You're frantic. That's the human response. So when the accounts of the last night reportedly shift and change, when there's a perceived lack of urgency, you have to ask the uncomfortable question that her family and the investigators working this case have asked. If you have nothing to hide, why would you act that way? Why would the story move? Now, I'll say it again because it matters. None of that is proof of anything, and Justin has not been charged. But it's exactly the kind of thing a competent investigation is supposed to dig into hard, and that's the tragedy. It doesn't seem like anyone dug in at all. Then there's the 2.5 blocks. And honestly, this is the detail that should make your blood boil. Jessica was found just over 2 blocks from her front door. This wasn't the middle of the Amazon. It wasn't 100 miles of trackless swamp. It was a patch of brush in a dense residential neighborhood, walking distance from her house. So how does an entire police department fail to do the single most basic thing imaginable? Walk down the street and look in the bushes? When someone goes missing, you search outward from the last known location in concentric circles. 2.5 blocks is the innermost circle. It's the first place you look. And they didn't. It took grieving family members from another state, on their first day actually searching, to find what a real investigation would have found in hour 1. That's not bad luck. That's a failure so basic it's hard to even comprehend. And here's the cruelest consequence of all that apathy. Because the police treated this as a runaway from the very start, the home was never treated as a crime scene. Think about what that means. Days went by, many days, with no scene secured, no evidence collected, nothing preserved. In that window, anything could have happened. Evidence could have been cleaned, moved, thrown out, destroyed. And then there's the body itself. By the time anyone found Jessica, she'd been lying in the summer heat for around 10 days, which devastates the forensic evidence a medical examiner needs. So the very inaction of the authorities may have erased the proof of what happened to her. Did they bungle it by accident, or was it pure, devastating apathy? From where the family sits, the distinction doesn't even matter. The result is the same. And now, we get to the gut punch that has frozen this entire case. When the coroner's report finally came back, it reportedly noted distinct, measurable physical injuries on Jessica's body. Injuries sustained before she died. Sit with that. Injuries before death. And yet, the Orleans Parish coroner ruled the cause and manner of death as undetermined, not homicide, undetermined. And that single word did something catastrophic. It effectively jammed the brakes on any murder investigation. Because with an undetermined ruling, the case gets filed as an unclassified death, and that classification creates a kind of bureaucratic paralysis. It can legally hamstring the department from bringing homicide-level resources to bear, the subpoenas, the aggressive warrants, the hard interrogations. The label itself becomes a wall. And this is where Jessica's complicated private life comes roaring back, because a lot of people who've examined this case believe it's not a coincidence. The theory advanced by her family, by independent journalists, by true crime investigators, and notably by retired NOPD homicide detectives who took the case on for free, is that Jessica was killed by someone inside her own home when she tried to execute her escape plan around August 12th. And they argue she was failed from the very first day, partly because of who she was, a woman involved in the adult entertainment industry, the kind of victim that, advocates say, investigating authorities too often quietly decide doesn't warrant the full weight of the system. A lifestyle gets used, consciously or not, as a reason to look away. So here's where this leaves everyone. This case is not closed, it's not solved, it's stuck, trapped behind that undetermined ruling, with advocates still fighting to get the death reclassified as a homicide so that a real investigation can finally begin. Retired detectives are working it on their own time. Journalists keep its name alive. And her family is left carrying a double weight, the loss of Jessica and the certainty that she was failed by the very people who were supposed to find her. So this is where we end the whole journey. A vibrant, beloved woman, 43 years old, who summoned the courage to plan her own escape, who had help coming the very next day, went silent in a watched, connected, modern American neighborhood. The people sworn to protect her decided she'd simply walked away and looked the other way. And in the end, it was her own sisters who had to fly across state lines, walk into a patch of tall grass 2.5 blocks from her door, and face the worst nightmare of their lives completely alone. She was right there, the whole time, 2.5 blocks away. All anyone had to do was look. Most of the cases on this channel end in a question mark. A body never found, a suspect never named, a town left guessing. This one is different. This one we actually know the answer to. And somehow, that makes it more terrifying, not less. Because what the cameras caught on a warm spring night in Lafayette, Louisiana, wasn't a random tragedy. It was a hunt, a predator in a white truck circling, calculating, waiting. And the only reason we know his name today is because the young woman he targeted fought back so ferociously that she carved the evidence of her own murder right into his skin. This is the story of Mickey Shunick. Let me set the scene. It's May of 2012 in Lafayette, the beating heart of Cajun country. And Lafayette is a good town, a vibrant, lively college city anchored by the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, full of students and music and food and that easy southern energy. Picture a warm Louisiana spring night. The bars are full, friends are out, and the streets feel safe. This is genuinely important to the story. In a town like this, bicycles aren't just for recreation. They're how students get around. You ride to class, you ride to a friend's place, you ride home from the bar at 2 in the morning, and you don't think twice about it. The streets are lit. The town is small enough to feel like family. It's the kind of place where a young woman riding her bike home alone at night is completely, utterly ordinary. Nobody thinks they're in danger. That's exactly what makes what happened so chilling. The predator was hiding in plain sight, inside the most normal night imaginable. Now, Mickey. Michaela Shunick, but everybody called her Mickey. She was 21, just days away from turning 22. And the word that comes up again and again from everyone who knew her is fierce. She was independent, strong, tough, deeply, deeply loved by a huge circle of friends, the kind of person who was the center of gravity in any room. She knew her city, she knew her roots, and she moved through Lafayette at all hours with total confidence. And she rode a black bicycle. Remember the bike, because that bike is going to become one of the single most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. Here's how the night unfolded. It's around 2 in the morning on May 19th. Mickey leaves a friend's house to ride home. Routine. A route she'd taken 100 times. She points her bike toward home and pedals off into the dark. And then the next day, she's gone. She can't be reached. And for someone as connected and reliable as Mickey, that silence is instantly, screamingly wrong. Panic sets in fast. And here's where Lafayette showed who it was. The community mobilized in a way you almost never see. Not dozens of volunteers, thousands. A grassroots search army formed practically overnight, plastering the city with flyers, combing fields and roadsides, refusing to let Mickey just become a statistic. That community pressure is going to matter enormously later. Hold on to it. Meanwhile, investigators do the smart thing. They start pulling CCTV footage from every business along Mickey's route, trying to track her path. And they find her. Grainy, green-tinted night vision footage captures Mickey on her bike, pedaling along St. Landry Street, near the UL intramural fields and bike paths. She's moving, she's fine. But then the cameras catch something else, a white Chevrolet pickup truck. And it's not just passing through. The footage shows the truck looping around, circling, repositioning, clearly tracking her route. Let's look at the footage for what it actually shows. This isn't a vehicle that happened to be on the same road. This is a vehicle hunting. The driver changes lanes to get behind her, and then he does the unthinkable. He used the truck to strike her bicycle from behind, forcing her to the ground to disable her. Armed with a blade and a firearm, he forces her into the cab. Days later, a group of local fishermen out in the Atchafalaya Basin find her bike. It had been thrown off a bridge near Whiskey Bay, dumped into that murky, alligator-infested swamp water, roughly 25 miles from where she was taken. And the bike is wrecked, the back tire bent and mangled. Okay, let's slow down, because the how of this crime is almost as disturbing as the crime itself, and there are details here that tell you exactly what kind of person you're dealing with. Start with the abduction itself. Think about the logistics. Mickey was an athlete, fit, strong, and by every account, a fighter who would not go quietly. So picture the scene. A truck rams a cyclist on a city street. The driver gets out and tries to force a tough, terrified, fighting 21-year-old into his vehicle. That should be loud. That should be violent. There should be a real crime scene. Debris from the collision, skid marks, maybe broken glass or plastic, and almost certainly screams. On a populated street in a college town. So how did he pull it off so fast and so quietly that there was no massive scene, no chorus of witnesses, no one calling 911 about a girl screaming in the road? The answer is speed and savagery. He hit her hard enough to stun and disable her instantly, and he had weapons in hand to control her in the seconds that followed. He'd thought about this. He knew that the window between attack and witnesses is tiny, and he moved inside it. Now, the bike. This is the detail that, for me, removes any doubt that this was calculated. The back tire was mangled, consistent with being struck from behind, which matches the footage exactly. But here's the question that matters. Why did he take the bike? Stop and think about that. If you panic, if you accidentally hit a cyclist and impulsively grab her, you flee. You leave the bike in the ditch and you floor it. You do not stop, get out, lift a damaged bicycle, load it into your truck bed, and drive off with it. That takes time. It exposes you. It's an enormous risk. So the only reason you take the bike is to remove the evidence. He didn't want that bike found at the scene, pointing investigators to the exact spot of the attack. Taking it was a cleanup, a cold, deliberate, in-the-moment decision to sanitize the crime. That is not the behavior of a man in a panic. That's the behavior of a man executing a plan. And then the dump site seals it. He didn't ditch the bike around the corner. He drove it 25 miles out to Whiskey Bay and threw it off a bridge into the Atchafalaya Swamp, one of the best places in all of Louisiana to make something disappear forever into the mud and the gators. That takes local knowledge. You have to know that swamp, know that bridge, know that the water out there swallows things. And here's the truly insidious part. Dumping the bike that far in one direction created a false search grid. It sent everyone looking out toward the basin. Because, and we'd learn this later, he'd actually taken Mickey's body in a completely different direction. The bike was a decoy. He was misdirecting an entire investigation in real time. So who does all this? Who hunts a girl on camera, executes a silent abduction, cleans the scene, and lays a false trail? His name is Brandon Scott Laverne. And here's the part that should make your blood run cold. He was already a registered sex offender, and he had murdered before, a woman named Lisa Marie Pate back in 1999. He'd been walking free, hunting the streets of Lafayette for years. Now, how did they get him? This is where Mickey's fierceness becomes the hero of her own story. Because inside that truck cab, she did not give up. She fought, hand to hand, for her life, even reportedly trying to use her phone. And in the process, she fought back, inflicting severe defensive lacerations on her attacker. Think about the courage and the will that takes in the worst moment imaginable. And those wounds had consequences. When Laverne later sought medical attention for unexplained injuries, it helped put him squarely on law enforcement's radar. The marks she left on him became evidence. Combine that with the relentless community pressure, the CCTV footage of that circling white truck, and solid police work, and the net closed. In July of 2012, Laverne was arrested on an unrelated warrant tied to his sex offender status and was then charged with first-degree murder and aggravated kidnapping. And here's the resolution that so many of these cases never get. That August, Laverne led investigators to her. Based on his own directions, her remains were recovered from a rural cemetery off Highway 10 in Evangeline Parish, buried, as we said, in the opposite direction from where he'd thrown the bike. LSU forensics confirmed it was Mickey, and rather than face the death penalty, Brandon Laverne pleaded guilty to the murder of Mickey Shunick and to the 1999 murder of Lisa Marie Pate. Two families finally got an answer. So I want to be clear-eyed about what this case is. Unlike so many stories we cover, this one got solved. The predator was named, he confessed, he's behind bars. The system eventually worked. But I don't think we should let that tidy ending erase how genuinely horrifying the mystery was at its center, or what it exposed. Because the real gut punch here isn't just one monster. It's that a convicted killer and registered sex offender was free to roam a college town and hunt a young woman on a bicycle. The footage of that white truck looping the block isn't just evidence. It's a warning about every gap in the system that let him be there at all. And it's a testament to two things. First, to a community that flat out refused to let a predator hide in the dark, thousands of strangers who turned their grief into a search army and kept the pressure on until there was nowhere left for him to go. And second, to Mickey herself. Because in the most terrifying moment of her life, cornered and outweighed and armed with nothing but her own ferocity, she fought hard enough to mark the man who took her. She couldn't save herself, but she made absolutely sure he couldn't disappear. So here's where we leave it. A warm spring night. A familiar route home. A girl on a black bicycle pedaling through a town that felt completely safe, and a set of headlights in the rearview mirror circling closer. She never got to make it home, but she made sure the man in that truck would never be a mystery, and that, in the end, is the kind of justice these stories so rarely get. There's a phone call in this case that I can't get out of my head. A father, late at night, dials his son's flip phone. The son picks up, but he doesn't talk. He whispers, He's terrified. He says he's hiding in a ditch in the woods because the police are chasing him. And then the line goes dead. That's the last anyone ever heard from Clinton Nelson. Here's the thing that makes it so haunting, the detail we'll come back to. When investigators checked the dispatch records for that night, there were no police chasing anyone. So who or what was Clinton running from in the dark? And how does a 6'1" young man vanish off a rural road with a broken arm, broken ribs, and a heart condition, and leave behind not one single trace? Let me set the scene. It's September 1st, 2006, Labor Day weekend. The place is Princeton, Louisiana, a small, semi-rural community tucked into Bossier Parish, way up in the northwest corner of the state. This is oil rig country. Hard physical work, young men chasing fast money, a gritty blue-collar grind, and the land out here is unforgiving. Thick piney woods, muddy bayous, deep drainage ditches, isolated properties strung along unlit dirt roads. And I really need you to understand the dark out here, because the darkness is practically a character in this story. We're not talking city dark. We're talking the kind of black where, once you step past the porch light, you genuinely cannot see your own hand in front of your face. The kind of dark that swallows things. Add to that the suffocating late summer Louisiana heat still hanging thick in the air at night, and you've got a landscape that does not forgive a single mistake. Now, the young man at the center of it, Clinton Devin Nelson, 21 years old. And the most important thing to understand about Clinton is that he was a complete outsider here, a fish out of water. He'd grown up in Spearfish, South Dakota, about as far culturally and geographically from a Louisiana bayou as you can get. He came down south for a fresh start, to work the oil rigs for good money, and to build a relationship with his biological father, Jeff Mason. He was 6'1", about 160 pounds, wore these distinctive little silver round wire-framed glasses, and had faint scars on his face. But here's the part you have to lock in, because it makes everything that happens next nearly impossible. At the time he disappeared, Clinton was badly hurt. Recently he'd suffered serious orthopedic injuries, 3 fractured ribs on his left side, a fractured left collarbone, and a fractured right arm. On top of that, he had a heart condition that required daily medication. So this is not some healthy, fast-moving 21-year-old who could sprint through the woods. This is a young man in real physical pain who could barely breathe deeply without it hurting. Remember that. And one more thing, because it's the psychological key to the whole night. A month earlier, on August 2nd, Clinton had been arrested at a routine traffic stop for possession of Xanax, marijuana, and ecstasy. That left him deeply, profoundly afraid of the police, hyper-vigilant, terrified of any further run-in with law enforcement. File that away too. So here's how the night unfolds. September 1st. Clinton heads to a house party with some acquaintances in the 800 block of Ward Lane in Princeton. He's dressed in a black Echo t-shirt, blue jeans, a black knit cap, and white DC sneakers with red trim. It's a party, people hanging out, drinking, the local scene. And it's worth noting what kind of scene that was. The local drug culture up there was steeped in this intense, low-grade paranoia, because Louisiana has these draconian drug homicide laws, meaning if you supply drugs to someone and they die, you can be charged with homicide. That's not a small detail. Hold on to it. It explains a lot of behavior. At some point in the evening, somewhere between 8:30 and 10 p.m., Clinton leaves the party. And right here, at the very first link in the chain, the story already starts falling apart. Because the partygoers couldn't agree on what happened. Some said he walked away calmly down Highway 80, heading toward Houghton. Others said he suddenly ran off into the night. Still others claimed he left safely in a vehicle. Same party, same handful of people. 3 completely different stories. Sit with that for a second, because we're going to come back to it hard. Then, late that night, his father Jeff Mason notices something, flashing police lights somewhere near the Ward Lane area. Worried, he calls his son's cell, and Clinton answers. But it's that whisper. Terrified, barely audible, he tells his father he's hiding in a ditch or the woods because he believes the police are chasing him. Then the phone disconnects, and Clinton Nelson is never heard from or seen again. When the family realizes he's gone, the response is massive. tracking dogs, helicopters, ground teams combing the woods, the bayous, the roadsides. The case eventually got so much attention, it was featured on the national true crime show Disappeared. And yet, after all of it, after every search, every dog, every flyover, they found nothing. Not a shred of clothing, not a bone, not his glasses, not his knit cap, not his wallet, not his cell phone, nothing. Okay, let's stop and actually pull this apart, because almost nothing about the official "he just walked off" story survives contact with logic. Start with the walk itself. The party's explanation is that Clinton simply left on foot and headed off down a dark country road. But think about who Clinton was. He was from South Dakota. He did not know these back roads. He'd been in the area a short time. So why would a 21-year-old, an outsider with no car, voluntarily walk off into pitch-black, unfamiliar Louisiana woods in the dead of night, instead of asking someone for a ride or just crashing on a couch? That's not what people do. When you're somewhere unfamiliar and it's that dark, you stay put. You don't wander off into terrain you can't see and don't know. It doesn't track. Now, layer the injuries on top of that, because this is where the ran-off version completely collapses. Some witnesses said he sprinted away into the woods, but Clinton had 3 broken ribs, a broken collarbone, and a broken arm. Anyone who's ever cracked a single rib will tell you, just breathing hurts, laughing hurts. Now imagine trying to run, full speed, over uneven, unlit, rutted rural ground, with 3 of them broken, plus a broken collarbone and a broken arm, plus a heart condition. The body simply won't do it. The pain of rapid breathing alone would stop you cold. So the image of Clinton bolting like a track star into the brush? Medically, that's almost a fantasy. It does not add up. Then there's the trace problem, which is the same wall we keep hitting in these Louisiana cases. Say the worst happened naturally. He wandered off, got disoriented in the dark, fell into one of those deep ditches, succumbed to the heat or his injuries, or a cardiac event. Tragic, but possible. Except, where is he? Massive grid searches, tracking dogs working a fresh scene, helicopters, and not one trace. People who get lost and die in the woods leave a trail. They leave a body. They leave a dropped phone, a shoe, something. Clinton vanished with his glasses, his cap, his wallet, and his phone, and none of it has ever been found. A man and everything he was carrying, gone clean. That's not how an accidental death in the woods usually reads. And now, the phantom chase, the detail that reframes everything. Clinton's final words were that the police were after him, but dispatch records show no officers were chasing anyone that night. So what was he running from? There are 2 ways to read it. 1, he was experiencing a chemically induced paranoid break, high, panicked, traumatized by that recent arrest, fleeing a threat that only existed in his own head until he collapsed somewhere out there. That's plausible. But it still doesn't explain why a search found nothing. Or 2, he really was afraid of something or someone that night, and the police are chasing me was a frightened young man's interpretation of a danger that was very real, just not wearing a badge. Which brings us to the part nobody wants to say out loud, but the logic keeps pointing at it. Whenever someone vanishes from a party and everyone there says some version of "he just walked away," you have to ask the uncomfortable question, did he actually make it to that road at all? And remember those wildly conflicting stories. Walked, ran, left in a car. When a group of witnesses can't agree on something that basic, it's rarely because everyone simply misremembered. It often means the truth is being smoothed over. Now, stack that against the environment, a drug-soaked party in a culture terrified of those drug homicide laws. Picture it. If something went wrong at that house, say Clinton, with his heart condition and his injuries, took something and had a medical emergency or overdosed, the people there would be staring down the barrel of a potential homicide charge. Panic. And the statistics here are blunt. People don't usually evaporate into thin air without someone at the party knowing a little more than they're letting on. The Bossier Parish Sheriff's Office openly suspects foul play, but the investigation has been strangled by a wall of silence so complete that even polygraphs of key witnesses, including his own father, couldn't break it open. So we're left with 2 competing endings, and neither one gives anybody peace. In one, a frightened, injured, possibly intoxicated young man stumbles into the unforgiving dark of the Louisiana woods, running from ghosts, and the landscape simply swallows him whole. In the other, something happened inside that house on Ward Lane, and a circle of terrified people made a body and a story disappear, and then closed ranks so tightly that 20 years of investigation couldn't pry a single honest answer loose. And through all of it, there's his mother, Carolyn Johnson, up in South Dakota, who has spent years making the long trip back and forth to Louisiana, searching, asking, pushing, refusing to let her son become just another name in a cold case file. Imagine that. Imagine driving 1,500 miles again and again into a community that you're increasingly certain is keeping its mouth shut about what happened to your boy. So here's where it ends. A young man crosses the entire country for a fresh start, a new job, a father he barely knew, a real shot at a different life. He goes to a party on a Friday night on Labor Day weekend. He walks out the door into that thick, swallowing Louisiana dark. He whispers to his father from a ditch that someone is chasing him, and then he simply ceases to exist. No body, no belongings, no trail, and a room full of people who, to this day, can't seem to tell the same story twice. Most missing persons cases start with a nobody, someone the world wasn't watching, who slips through a crack no one was guarding. But every once in a while, the person who vanishes is someone the entire world should have been watching. Someone whose face was on magazine covers in 3 countries. Someone descended from Hollywood royalty. And that's what makes this one so deeply strange. Because when Alenia Carisi walked into the dark in New Orleans in January of 1994, she should have been one of the most findable people on the planet. Instead, she became one of the most haunting question marks in modern true crime. And it all hangs on 6 words, spoken at the edge of a river. I belong in water. Let's set the scene. It's January 1994. New Orleans, the French Quarter. And if you've never been, let me try to give you the feel of it. Because the place itself is a character in this story. Picture narrow streets glowing with neon, the air thick with the smell of the river and stale beer. Jazz spilling out of doorways, fortune tellers on the corners, and drifting through all of it, this whole ecosystem of street musicians, runaways, artists, and people who came here specifically to disappear, to shed whoever they used to be and become someone anonymous. The quarter has always attracted people who want to get lost, and right at the edge of all that chaos and beauty runs the Mississippi River. Wide, dark, deceptively calm on the surface and absolutely lethal underneath. Fast currents, freezing water, undertows that can pull a strong swimmer straight down. That contrast is the whole story. Glittering life on one side, black water on the other. Now, the victim. And victim is already a loaded word here, so just hang with me. Alenia Maria Sol Carisi. She was 23, and she wasn't some anonymous backpacker. This was European pop royalty. Her parents were Albano and Romina Power, a wildly famous Italian singing duo, the kind of celebrity that gets mobbed in the streets of Rome. And it goes deeper than that. Her grandfather was the Hollywood icon Tyrone Power. Her grandmother was the actress Linda Christian. So Alenia was born into immense wealth and global fame, the kind most people can't imagine. But here's what makes her so compelling. She wanted nothing to do with it. She was fiercely independent and seriously brilliant, a top literature student at King's College London, reportedly with the highest marks in her year, and she wanted to be a novelist. And to write something real, she decided she needed to live something real. So she rejected the luxury. She sold her belongings to fund a solo backpacking trip across Central and North America, embedding herself in exactly the kind of rough, transient street culture her family had spent fortunes insulating her from. Now, was she brave or was she naive? Probably both, because for all her education, a privileged kid from that world may not have truly understood how dangerous the people she was drifting among could be. Keep that in mind. So here's how it unfolds. By late December 1993, Alenia is making her way north toward New Orleans. There's this gut punch of a detail right at the start. Her brother, Yari, actually flew down to Belize to surprise her and arrived just one day too late. She'd already left. They missed each other by a day. On December 31st, she arrives in New Orleans and checks into the Lee Dale Hotel on St. Charles Avenue, a cheap place a few blocks off the quarter. And she's not alone. She's sharing the room with a man named Alexander Masekela, a street musician. And here's where the alarm bells should already be ringing. Masekela was 54 years old, more than 30 years her senior. A man with a documented history of illicit substance use and severe predatory behavior. And this is the part that's almost impossible to process. Elenia reportedly referred to him as her master. That same night, New Year's Eve, she calls her parents in Italy. By all accounts, it's a tense call. Her father, Albano, is upset, frustrated that she's gone back to New Orleans at all. They hang up. And that's one of the last times her family ever hears her voice. For about a week, things are quiet. Then, on January 6, 1994, Elenia is seen during the day by a few local acquaintances moving through the French Quarter. And after that, she's gone. Now here's the thing that makes your skin crawl. When she vanishes, Masekela doesn't call the police. He doesn't raise the alarm. Instead, he stays in the hotel. And he tries to check out by paying the bill with Elenia's traveler's checks she hadn't signed. When the hotel staff push back, he doesn't get nervous and leave. He doubles down. He produces her actual passport to prove he's connected to her. Sit with that. Your young roommate disappears, and your move is to cash her unsigned checks and wave around her passport. But the official story doesn't go toward Masekela. It goes toward the river. Because late that same night, around 11:30 p.m. on January 6th, a night security guard at the Aquarium of the Americas, a man named Albert Cordova, reported something he said he'd never forget. He saw a blonde woman matching Elenia's exact description in a floral dress and a dark jacket, sitting alone on a wooden pier at the edge of the Mississippi. And according to Cordova, before she went into the water, she said it plainly, "I belong in water." Then she slipped in. She swam out, maybe 100 yards, struggled against the wake of a passing boat, screamed for help, and went under. And she never came back up. Her parents, having lost contact, officially report her missing on January 18th. Okay, stop. Because the official narrative, a tragic intentional drowning, case closed, has more holes in it than the story can hold. Let's start with Masekela, because honestly, the official version kind of glosses right over him. Walk through the logic. If this is a clean, tragic, intentional drowning by the river, a young woman in crisis who walked to the water on her own, then how does the 54-year-old man she was living with end up holding her passport, her traveler's checks, her camera, her clothes, and most heartbreakingly, the handwritten journals she valued above everything she owned? A passionate young writer does not voluntarily abandon her journals. So either she left all of it behind, every critical possession, including the survival documents an experienced international traveler guards with her life, or somebody took them. And the man who had them sure didn't act like a grieving friend. He acted like a man cashing out an estate. He got arrested at the end of January on an unrelated felony assault charge, and then released less than 2 weeks later because there wasn't physical evidence tying him to Elenia. Released, with the case wide open. Now, the river witness. Cordova's story is genuinely chilling, and I'm not here to call the man a liar. But let's look at it with clear eyes. He saw a blonde woman at night from a distance at the edge of a river. And this is the French Quarter, a city absolutely packed with tourists, transients, and yes, plenty of young blonde women. Was it Elenia? We don't actually know. It's an identification based on a glimpse in the dark. And here's the bigger problem. If it was her and she drowned right there, where's the body? The Mississippi is notorious, sure, but rivers usually give up their dead eventually. They wash up, they snag, they surface downstream. The Coast Guard ran extensive searches, and they found absolutely nothing. Not a scrap of clothing, not a trace, nothing. And then there's the problem that towers over the whole case, the fame problem. Because two of the loudest alternative theories are that Elenia was trafficked, or that she successfully faked her own death and escaped her suffocating famous family to live anonymously somewhere. There were even rumors she'd ended up in a convent in Arizona. And look, you can understand the emotional appeal of she's still out there. But run the logic. This is one of the most recognizable young women in all of Europe. Her face was everywhere. If she's alive, she has lived more than 30 years now without a single confirmed sighting. No photograph, no paper trail, no reunion, no slip-up, no deathbed confession from anyone. How does a global celebrity stay perfectly invisible for 3 decades? It's nearly as hard to believe as the river story. Maybe harder. So you've got 3 explanations, and every single one of them leaves you stuck. The self-inflicted death story can't explain the missing body or the man holding all her things. The murder or trafficking story can't produce a body or a culprit because the one obvious suspect was released. And the she's alive and free story can't explain how someone that famous vanished from the face of the earth without a trace. Every road dead ends. It tore her family apart, and it still hasn't healed. Her father, Albano, eventually made peace with the darkest answer. He petitioned an Italian court to have her declared legally dead in 2014, accepting that the river took his daughter. But her mother, Romina Power, has never accepted it. To this day, she believes Olenia is alive, that she escaped or was taken, but that she's out there somewhere. One parent grieves a death. The other still waits by the phone. Same daughter. 2 completely different endings, and neither of them has a body or proof or peace. So here's where we land. A brilliant young woman, born into fame she didn't want, chasing a raw and authentic life she thought she could handle, drifted into the most seductive and dangerous corner of New Orleans. She fell in with a much older man she called her master. She vanished on a January night, and the only account of her final moments comes from a security guard who watched a blonde woman walk into the black water of the Mississippi and say she belonged there. Maybe she did slip into that river. Maybe the man in the hotel knows exactly what happened and took her secrets to his own grave. Maybe, somewhere against all odds, she's living a quiet life under a name nobody knows. But 30 years on, the river hasn't talked. The man didn't talk. And one of the most famous young women in Europe is still standing at the edge of that pier in the dark, on the line between 2 worlds, about to disappear into whichever one you choose to believe.